right, good morning, everyone. I'm going to do what Andy did. Good morning, everyone. There we go. All right. Do you have one? All right. As Andy said, my name is Parham Eftekhari. I'm one of the EVPs at CyberRisk Alliance. I want to once again say how really honored we are to take stewardship over Identiverse. It's my first time at an identity conference. I've been in the business for about 15 years or so, and I've never really delved this deep into this industry, and it's wonderful seeing some old friends, making new friends, and just want to thank all of you for being here, and of course, thank Ping Identity for the fantastic partnership. I'm in the leadership business. What I do at CRA is manage one of the divisions of the organization, which is really focused on executive education for current CISOs and emerging CISOs and executives. And I was really excited when Andy asked me to facilitate today's discussion, because while we have a lot of conversations being held over the course of this event that is really focused on tech, like we just saw in this fantastic demo, what I really love and what really gets me excited every day is talking about the people side of what we do. Because as we all know, technology essentially is irrelevant if we don't have the right culture that supports these ideas and really understands and prioritizes security. That starts at the top of the organization all the way down. And so what we're going to do today is really talk about those types of issues, and we have a fantastic panel of cybersecurity executives from a diverse group of organizations that are going to share their perspectives with us. To my far left is Sean Zadig, who is the CISO of Yahoo. Next we have Nicole, who's the head of security for games at Riot Games. And to my immediate left is Jim Routh, currently I think he's living his best life as an advisor and board member, but he's served many prominent roles as a CISO for organizations like CVS Health, Mass Mutual, and Aetna. And I'd be remiss not to mention that both Sean and Jim are fellows at the Institute for Critical Infrastructure Technology, where I'm privileged to serve as a board chair, and Nicole has been nominated. So a lot of great thought leadership here. So guys, just to get started with, as I mentioned, there's a diverse set of experiences that you all have, B2B, B2C, healthcare, tech, et cetera. As you're going about leading your security teams and leading your organization's security strategy, just to level set with us, where does identity fit? I mean, is it a top priority? Is it somewhere in the middle? I mean, how do you guys prioritize identity as part of your strategies?
Yeah, I think identity is definitely in the top 3. Now, every enterprise has a different attack surface, so you have to recognize that it's not a one-size-fits-all model. But I think identity has to be in the top 3. And largely, we're dealing with a situation today. All of us as practitioners are dealing with an environment where we have passwords that are ubiquitous, that we're using across all sorts of digital assets. They're growing in obsolescence, and that growth is happening daily. And so as identity professionals in cybersecurity, we got to change the authentication capability, and that really needs to be more of a mandate for us as practitioners to move to something with low friction and high security, which is possible today. We have choices to do that, and make it pay for itself in these economic times. So that's really where we as practitioners need to step up to the plate. And I think we have a lot of choices and options that we never had before, and I think we're at the cusp of realizing that.
Yeah, identity is a key part of, at the purest level, everything that we do in security, right? Whether it be for our players or, our internal associates. Just understanding habits, right? Being able to access anything, even when we have security incidents, right? Being able to tie everything back to identity. It's such a core part of everything that we do. I have to agree and probably say it's definitely top 3.
So no surprise, I'm going to say it's also really important to us. I would say it's critical for a company like Yahoo. For us, there's really 2 types of identities we need to focus on. There's the employee identity, which I think a lot of us are thinking about. And adversaries, they really want to go and target those employees. They want to take our intellectual property. They want to target our user data. At Yahoo, we have reporters who are in-house, and they may want to target sources and try to silence reporting. But then we also provide services for hundreds of millions of people around the world. And for those individuals, the stakes are very high. We have organized cyber criminals who might be trying to steal in-game currency or cryptocurrency or drain retirement accounts. We've got militaries who are looking to gain a battlefield advantage, intelligence agencies looking to steal secrets. The stakes are very high for our users in the physical world. And I think one of the things that's important for us as professionals to realize is what happens on the digital side, plays out in the physical side. And it's not just that our users lose trust in us as a platform that we've taken a long time to build, but also bad things happen to them in the real world.
Great. And also, to the AV team, if we can have a third handheld mic up here, that would be great. So, one of the things as you were talking, I reflected back on the prep calls that we had, and one of the themes that kept coming up was really the role that each of you play and your peers play as, engaging with the right stakeholders, right? It really comes down to going back to the theme here, which is really culture and leadership. Success for all of you, I'm assuming, really is dependent on stakeholder engagement, whether it's internal stakeholders, partners, vendors, et cetera. Talk to me about how you go about engaging with your external stakeholders and internal stakeholders, and some of the lessons learned that you can share with the audience about how to be successful in doing that, to drive the outcomes that you want.
Yeah, I'll share one perspective. As a first-time CISO, I made this mistake in spades, and I'm hopeful that any of you that are aspiring to be CISOs, that you can take advantage of my scar tissue. You don't have to make this mistake. I assumed that my role was to meet the expectations of the senior leadership, the executive team, as stakeholders. And let's just start with them as the initial stakeholders. And that assumption meant that I need to play a role as a subject matter expert in cybersecurity, so that's exactly what I did. It was natural. I kind of fell into it because that's what they expected. I didn't get it. My responsibility as a leader was actually to facilitate consensus for what the top cyber risks are. And if you just do a search on facilitation, the first thing it tells you is you got to be unbiased. You got to be neutral. And if you're the subject matter expert, what happens is the stakeholders delegate the decision to you. And that decision doesn't sustain itself when times get tough. Consensus amongst your stakeholders requires you to be a facilitator and requires you to be unbiased. So someone else has to play the role of the subject matter expert. Now, again, I learned this the hard way. I came up with the top cyber risks for the enterprise. I was working for American Express at the time. Ken Chenault and his direct reports all agreed, nodded their heads. And then when it came time to budget time, when we were planning our investments, it all crumbled. It fell apart. I said, wait a minute, we had all these priorities. And they basically said, well, those are your priorities. You are the subject matter expert, not necessarily our priorities. And I learned a valuable lesson that our job as a CISO is really to be a facilitator of consensus, because that consensus will sustain itself when we have difficult times, difficult economic times, which we're facing today.
Yeah, so I think as security professionals, a mistake that we make is we use unapproachable lingo. We kind of cloak our work in like a shroud of mystery. We use terms that are like military terms, like TTPs and kill chain. And what this does is it turns off those stakeholders. It makes our work unapproachable. And so I have a phrase I like to use within our organization: no secret squirrels. Like, let's just demystify, let's come down to the level that our stakeholders are at, let's engage with them there. Then we can get that consensus that we need. And I think that's a really important lesson that we often forget, that we gotta treat our stakeholders, like adults, and talk in plain language to them. We give approachable readouts. We don't hide the truth from them if we're talking about an incident that might have been embarrassing to us. That builds a lot of trust with these stakeholders, and it gets us a lot of mileage.
So this is something that I am laser focused on at Riot Games, is building the BISO function, the Business Information Security Officer. And I love that priority because, it essentially helps us shift security from like the right thing to do to the smart thing to do, right? So how do we get our business leaders to, again, trust us, right? And a big part of that is really positioning security to be an enabler of the goals that they like to accomplish. So it's a lot of active listening. It's a lot of understanding. It's a lot of getting feedback from the customer. It's about listening to the business and what their experience has been with security. And if it's negative, figuring out how to shift it. And if it's positive, how do you add on to that? So a lot of that is speaking their language, eliminating the jargon. Sometimes I sit in on new hire sessions. I sit in on SLT meetings. I want to understand what the business goals are and figure out how do I inject security into that strategy to help them make that thing better. So as they continue to proceed down their roadmap, it's not just, hey, where do we inject security? It's how do we pull in security to make sure that we can do the things that we want to do in the most thoughtful, secure manner.
And as you're talking,
Sean, I just want to clarify one thing. No secret squirrels, but I'm assuming it's okay to have mascots, our friends at Salesforce. I think that's okay, right?
Mascots get a lot of mileage, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, no worries. As you guys were talking about how you lead and how you build influence, share the role that you feel that your teams play. Because in the audience here, I'm certain we have CISOs, but we also have individuals who are part of the CISO's team. And being in the leadership business, I believe in pervasive leadership. I think we all know that we could not do it without our teams, and all the CISO sessions and workshops and working groups that I'm part of, and regardless of the topic, we end up talking about the people and the workforce. What do you do as leaders to inspire, and what advice can you give the audience here who isn't a CISO, but they're saying, like, gosh, this makes sense, and I want to be an agent for change? How can they do that if they feel like they don't have that leadership role?
I think there are a lot of opportunities to partner, and you can lead from below, you can lead from a side, of course you can lead from above, but I typically find, or behind, right? But I typically find that you get more play with influence than you do authority. That's number one. I've been building out, my program on a 3-pronged strategy, which is alignment, advocacy, and advisement, right? So first, looking at our roadmaps from whatever domain you are in the InfoSec space and looking at the business and how does your priorities align with that of theirs? Are there gaps? And if so, are these things that we really need to do core? And is there any room that we can carve out to infiltrate ours with that of the business? From an advocacy perspective, and this is really, really great for people who may not be senior leaders. What you can do is take an opportunity to advocate for the business within your domain and then advocate for your domain or information security as a whole to the business, right? By driving that value proposition. And then the last one is advisement, right? And so that's where the listening comes in, figuring out what people want to do and then advise them on the best road to take. I think collectively those 3 have really helped me move the needle.
So influence is exactly the right word for us. We actually run influence campaigns. I mean, you might read about in the news that try to affect elections and things like that. We have a team that's called the behavioral engineering team within our org, and we're focused on changing behavior through influence. And we run campaigns that go up, they go down, they go out to my peers, other leaders across the organization. And we're looking to change behavior. We're looking to change, hearts and minds, essentially. And we do this through influence. And for me personally, that means a lot of meetings with stakeholders. I spend most of my time in one-on-ones with leaders, either inside my organization, but increasingly outside. The business unit leaders, the product team, engineering leaders. What's ahead of them? What's coming? Where do they need help? And where can we as a security team lean in and support that, and not be the department of no, but tell them yes, and let's focus on a way to do it safely and securely.
Yeah, I think the evolution of CISOs today is moving towards a model where the CISO is a primary educator. And in fact, if you look at the stakeholders that you have inside the organization and outside the organization that really have to come to bear to deal with cyber resilience at an enterprise level, you got to be an educator, and that means designing curriculum and surrounding yourself with educators that can help you do that, both inside the enterprise and outside the enterprise. And being an educator is the way to be the influencer, but we have to put aside this notion of our job is to educate on security awareness. All right, that ship has sailed. All right, you just pick up the paper, you look at your mobile phone, you're full of security all the time. It's not. We don't want a culture of security. We want a culture of resilience. And our job as cybersecurity professionals is to educate end users and all of our stakeholders on what they need to do their jobs more effectively. And that's coaching on the techniques. It's not about awareness anymore. That ship is.
Yeah, one of the groups that I run for CRA is called the Cybersecurity Collaborative. It's a community of CISOs that essentially work together to create tools and resources and kind of CISO develop content for their peers. And the topic that we come back to is stakeholder engagement, boardroom engagement, and that whole topic of how can CISOs be better leaders, be better influencers, and be better educators, to use your term. So that's spot on. On that note, and talking about the ship has sailed on security awareness training, one of the things that I think is really critical is moving from reactive to proactive security, right? And really ingraining security by design and those concepts within organizations. What are you doing to influence culture, and what have you seen that's successful in influencing culture to move from reactive to proactive?
So ironically, the three of us were having a little side conversation before the panel, and we were talking about what a great opportunity to learn when you have a major cybersecurity incident. Now, we typically associate pain and business impact with incidents, but there is no better way to test the efficacy of your controls than having a real-time incident. And the key in your incident response has to be to apply lessons learned going forward to improve your processes so that you're ultimately more resilient post-incident than you are prior to that incident. And essentially, our job, I think, is to celebrate the incidents in the learnings that we can derive from that to apply going forward. And that's ultimately the definition of cyber resilience at the enterprise from my perspective. Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think what's helpful for us as CISOs is to remind ourselves what security is. So security is ultimately a feeling that our users, our stakeholders have, that we're responsible for cultivating. And culture is that tool. It helps us build that kind of one-to-many relationship so we can get that feeling out there, because we're ultimately asking people to do something that they probably don't want to do as part of their natural everyday life. And we want to make that ingrained. We want to make it a habit. And it takes a bit of changing of their perspective, and culture is how we do that. And so at Yahoo, for example, I almost see us as the sort of shepherd of our culture, our company culture. We use a lot of videos that are very approachable. We have our senior executives who dress up in funny costumes. They wear disguises. We have puppets. We do weird special effects. And we produce these videos both for employee onboarding, annual security training, and then kind of just in time when there's incidents that we want to do a readout of. There's threat intelligence that we want to convey to our employee base. And we use these sort of approachable tools that really help our employees understand what we're trying to convey. But they also really look forward to the fact that these videos are coming out. And so we're actually now, because of this sort of irreverent way of expressing very serious topics, we're now a big part of the culture. And our employees look forward to the next security video dropping at our company all hands, for example. And that's one way of, back to our earlier question, of building influence and kind of remaining sort of top of mind for our employees.
Switching gears a little bit, identity access management has, it's not new, right? We've been talking about this for a long time. I laugh every time we have to remind people to do MFA, because we've been talking, it's the first thing I learned when I entered into cyber, and here we are, still struggling with it. How do you think that technologies and adoption of technologies have kept pace with the changing world we live in? Working from home, all the apps that we're accessing, mobile devices, just the way consumers and business users engage with tech. How are we doing keeping up with the tech that to apply to kind of solve some of these problems?
The technology is much more resilient than we ever expected. And if you think about the experience that we learned from work from home, from COVID, we're the ones that broke down, the humans. The infrastructure did really well. And of course, going into it, we're like, oh, the infrastructure is not going to work. We've never done this across the entire enterprise. It'll never work. Pushing transformation like this. Yeah. We accelerated IT transformation and a movement to the cloud in a way that we never could have anticipated. Look, the technology did just fine. It's us that have to adapt.
Yeah.
So I think IAM is, like, it's increasingly important now, much more so than it was 2.5 years ago. You know, we, as I think everybody probably in the room did, we had to do an incredibly sharp pivot. And the things that we relied upon, you know, I think as we almost use as a crutch, like office visibility and, you know, network signals and things like that, that didn't really apply or were much less important in this sort of work from home environment. We had to really focus on, you know, endpoints and especially IAM signals to help us make sense of what we're seeing in that environment that is now super distributed. And so some of the things that are now, you know, rising to the top of our concerns, like insider threat, you know, IAM is like super critical to understanding that space. And, you know, an employee's roles, what they have access to, what type of data they have and applications they can access, and what permissions they have within those applications. That's something that, you know, I think our old tools kind of lacked, and we're realizing there are some gaps that we need to address pretty quickly so we can stay on top of these trends. So yeah, super, super important to us.
Yeah. What about, it's come up a few times, passwords. I just experienced, you know, I'm old school, so I have like a notebook that have all my passwords hidden in my house, and if anyone finds that, they can basically rob me of everything I own. But what happened is today, when I went to print this in the business center, I didn't know how to log into my Gmail, and I was so annoyed, and FedEx, no disrespect to FedEx, but it was complicated, and she did give me a free copy of this, which is nice of her. But it kind of like, it seems like passwords are just an antiquated way of doing things, and I think it was mentioned in some of the sessions earlier, yesterday and just this morning. What are your thoughts on passwords and moving towards passwordless authentication, and how are we doing on that journey?
So passwords have served the enterprise really well for 60 years. And it's actually not passwords that are the problem today, it's us using passwords are the problem.
Guilty.
Guilty as charged, right? I mean, all of us use passwords. I mean, when you have 200 or more digital assets that you have to put a password in, I mean, how are you gonna, you can't manage that. And even if you use a password manager and single sign-on, which basically, you know, camouflages what's really going on underneath as the password, the reality is the password as, you know, standing the test of time up till now, it's growing in obsolescence. We have to fundamentally change it. And it turns out, see, when security professionals have designed authentication, we've thought about the more sensitive the information, the more friction we're going to introduce into the end user in the name of security. And it's usually people like us that have to wear Kevlar to, you know, some of these meetings to protect ourselves against the fact that you got to protect information. Well, that's no longer valid. There's technology today that allows us to remove friction, and passwordless as a category is a great example of that. So remove friction so that enhances the digital experience for consumers. It eliminates accounts takeover. Eliminates it. There are no credentials to be had, so that, you know, threat actors can't do anything about that. And the irony is, it's a lower cost of operating, which in today's economic conditions is really important. So you can reduce operating costs, you can improve the digital experience, and in some cases gain revenue and market share from that, all by replacing passwords with passwordless options. And you got a lot of choices to do that today. So really, there's no better time. And in these economic times, roll it up the flagpole, we can reduce operating costs. And I guarantee you, your CFO, your CIO, and your CEO are going to be, I want to learn more about that. How do we do that? Oh, by the way, we improve the digital experience along the way. So we have to jump on this mandate and unfortunately put passwords behind us. As an industry, it's inevitable, and I think we have to step up that challenge.
So one of the things I love about Riot is that we are obsessed with player experience, right? Which is great, because as a security leader, I'm not only thinking about player experience, but I'm also thinking about user experience, right? So I have both external and internal customers. And passwords are challenging, right? I'm much like you, Parham. I forget them all the time.
I know.
Like it's so bad. But when you look at a lot of what's happening in the industry, bad actor strategies, right? The number one way that they're getting into our networks and our ecosystems are through social engineering, right? And then lateral movement, and then you all know what happens. We see what's happening with ransomware spin. So when you begin to think about user experience from both your clients, your internal clients, and those bad actors, something has to be done. So I think it's a big part of essentially where we need to pivot in this industry, and I think we've got to make it less friction. And we've got to make it more, we want to enhance that user experience, right? I love the idea that the more we increase security, it does not mean that we increase friction, because that's what a lot of our business partners and our customers are saying. And so I love the new thought that, we can be more secure with less of that impacting that user experience.
So I'm going to, actually on a little bit of a tangent, I love the password book, to be honest. Like, I recommend that to people, because I think as security folks, we often, we don't think about threat modeling in the right way. Mm-hmm. And like, for 99% of the people in this room, the password book at home, totally fine. Like, no one's breaking into your house to steal your stuff. So, okay, passwords. I might be a bit of an opposing view here. I kind of like the password. I think ultimately, long term, it's got to go away. But right now, our users expect the password. And like, we've tried to get rid of it in the past, and we've faced extreme reluctance to do that. So I think, it's here to stay for a while. So how do we make the best use of it now? We combine it with things. Obviously, multi-factor is, it's bread and butter for us. But we need to focus on, it's still a thing that it's useful. You combine it with a thing that you have, like app-based push or, FIDO token or something. Maybe combine it with something you are, like biometrics. Like, that combination is still pretty good. The problem, of course, is that our attackers, they really focus heavily on taking that password. They're always about, get the password. And so, our users, they, we don't fault them for this. They've been trained to do it, but like, if there's a box, they're going to put their password in it. And so, right now, it works okay. You got to combine it with things. And I think also we need, as we're designing resilient applications, we need to stop focusing on just that edge. Like, it's not just the password at initial authentication and then like whatever. It's got to be a dynamic kind of, like, you ramp up when certain actions happen, you ramp down when other actions happen. It's sort of a sliding continuum of authentication and authorization. And that's, the password still has a role to play there, I think.
Sean might be right that passwords are going to linger for a while. But my view is, when threat actors like a control better than the end user likes a control, in this case passwords, maybe it's time to change.
Yeah. As you guys were just chatting, all of you are referencing essentially observations on your stakeholders, whether it's the consumer or the business. How are you getting this intelligence? Is it data science? Are you doing? I mean, how do you know what the right step is, and what actions need to be taken, either to push out the technologies and processes that will be adopted, or what to actually educate on to get kind of change the hearts and minds, Sean, like you talked about?
I look at, well, first, as Sean mentioned, we spend a lot of our time talking to people. You get so much juice and intel from just sitting down and talking to people. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing, to piggyback off of what Sean mentioned earlier, is looking at our threat landscape, right? Like, what's really important and where do I want to spend my effort, energy, and time? Our players have no qualms about giving us feedback, so that's a lot easier to get. But I think it's about looking at, where people are spending most of their time, where does most of our risk lie, what's happening with a lot of our incidents, and then figuring out if it makes sense to focus there, or if there's a bigger pressing matter that I need to attend to.
Yeah, I think we need to be sponges. So everywhere there's a story that's being told, everywhere there's a user, an employee, griping about some experience they had, we need to soak that all in as much as possible. So, we do a lot of engagement with, internal employees. We do, user stories and QA and research with our users out. I actually spent some time with like a grandmother in Dallas, and she talked about how she used Yahoo News and what she liked and what she didn't like, and that was really valuable to hear that. We also, as had mentioned earlier, what our adversaries are saying, what the enemies are saying about what they like. So we pay threat intelligence vendors to go and collect intelligence for us in the underground forums and on Telegram and other places, report back to us on how their experiences with ATO and with our the protections and controls are rolling out. And it's really get it from everywhere you can, internalize it, and then repeat it out as a story you can tell to to get the support and influence you need.
Parham, 20 years ago when I started in cybersecurity, the identity access management team was looked upon as the dumping ground for lack of talent in the IT organization. And people told me that from the IT side and the cybersecurity side. That's no longer true today, but I think it's actually come full circle. So, yesterday's opening for Identiverse and this morning's opening with the silhouettes, I think you can agree that it's cool. Identity is cool, right? That was really cool. I'm going to go out on a limb here and take it a step further, and you mentioned data science. I think data science makes identity access management sexy to data scientists and top technologists that want to do machine learning algorithms. And so in my mind, I think we've come full circle. I think identity is the place to be today, and I think it's all based on a fundamental principle that says behavior doesn't lie. We can turn behavioral attributes into numbers easily. We can identify deviation from behavior, mathematically represent that, apply that across multiple attributes, and do all of that in milliseconds, initiating for the right threshold automated action, where cybersecurity professionals don't have to intervene, apply context, do more digging, and then decide how to take action. All of this can happen in milliseconds, and it's fertile ground in identity access management. Identity today in a cybersecurity organization, because of data science, is sexy. I'm going out on a limb here.
I love that. I'm sure everyone here loves to hear that as well. Talking about the workforce, how are all your, and Sean, on our call, you talked about, please correct me if I'm wrong, but Yahoo's kind of this massive but kind of startup, right? And you talked about that. How are you guys doing with regards to, or the organizations you support, doing with regards to finding talent? Where are you going? Is it as challenging in the identity space as it is apparently in all other kind of parts of cyber?
Yes, it's super challenging. And I think the way that we are approaching talent at Yahoo within the organization, the security organization, which by the way is called the Paranoids, a little bit of branding there, we look outside the normal security places, right? And so it's not just computer science graduates. It's not just people coming out of the intelligence or law enforcement areas. We've hired a number of, 3 now, I think, former reporters and journalists who can help us tell that story. We hire, graphics artists and writers. We also do a lot of recruiting from elsewhere in the business. So folks who understand the landscape, they understand how we build code, how we deploy it. They have an interest in security. We want to take them in. We want to, nurture that, and we want to help them become security experts. And maybe they stay. Maybe they launch back out into the business and kind of be your eyes and ears out there. That's great. But it's super hard to find talent right now. And so as much as possible, looking to alternative places to find it, places that the other companies maybe aren't looking. I think we take a chance on people. We bring people in who are kind of earlier in their careers, and we sort of nurture them, we mentor them, and maybe they launch back out, they go out into the industry, and they succeed. Maybe they stay with us and continue to grow. But I think taking more chances now on talent is really important.
I agree. I think what we're looking to do is make sure that we're not just building a security function for now, but building a security function for the future where we want to go, right? We are moving from just a simple PC game company to now an entertainment company with series on Netflix and virtual record labels. So now we're beginning to venture into territory that we are very unfamiliar with. And I think one of the things that, we're focusing on too is not just looking at the hardcore technical skills, because those can be trained, right? But as we think about security as an enabler of collaboration and scale, right? We need people who can listen, people who can solidify partnerships, people who understand how to be innovative problem solvers, right? And so I think that's a big, big part of our recruiting strategy. Another thing is us being really laser focused on what our values are and making sure that we incorporate that into the recruiting process. And I really like how Riot takes a lot of care around the people that we choose to bring into the fold, because we've got a little bit of a wonky culture, right? But I think that's what makes us special. Does that make things a little bit more complicated? Sure. And we're relying a lot on the personal networks of the people that are already at Riot. We've got some Boomerang employees. And much like Sean said, we're looking in new spaces to find new talent.
Yeah, to build on what Nicole shared with us, I'm going to suggest a couple of things, specifically unconventional techniques for HR that you have to apply given the market conditions that we operate in today. There is a scarcity of talent, and the talent that we need actually is shrinking while the demand for that talent is increasing. And that's not a one-year phenomena. That's been going on for about 5 or 6 years, and it's going to continue. Whether it's cybersecurity professionals or specific data science skill, there's a scarcity of resource. So therefore, what I'm going to suggest is, A, you have to partner with your HR colleague, whoever you're working with. That's the easy thing. The not so easy thing is you have to convince your colleague to use some unconventional techniques. So the way it works in every major organization today is you post a position when you have the need, and you look at what the market provides you and you choose the best candidate. That's hiring when you find the right candidate. What you need to think about is that we hire people, or we need to hire people, when we find them, regardless of the posting process or the tenure to that posting process. So the whole notion of putting a job description in massive detail out there and expecting to find talent in the market that's diverse for inclusive purposes and has the right skill set that you can teach the engineering to is a misnomer. We have to always recruit, always. You never stop, which means that when your company in economic tough times has a hiring freeze, you don't adhere to it, okay? It means you tell the market, we're always recruiting top, diverse talent. Never turn it off. We do it in lots of different ways, and we initiate exploratory interviews. What's an exploratory interview? An exploratory interview is not for a specific role. You're just trying to assess talent and understand the intellectual curiosity, which sometimes leads to quirky behavior. And you tolerate the quirky behavior because you want the intellectual curiosity, because cybersecurity professionals have to be intellectually curious because threat actors change tactics all the time. We can't teach that. We can teach everything else. We can teach all the technology skills we need. We can't teach that. So we have to find that, and when we find it, we have to ask the candidate in the interview, what are the 2 things you wish to learn professionally? And then we have to play back those 2 things to them. And if we offer them a position, that position has to be designed to allow them to learn those 2 things that they chose. And once they're engaged in the company, we have to continually ask them, choose 2 things you want to learn professionally and master, whatever skills you want. Each year, we have to dedicate 30% of our time to managing talent. Stop participating in employee retention programs. You cannot find an employee that wants to be retained. Employees want to be developed. So just change your lexicon to talent development. Invest more of your leadership time in talent development. Does that tie to education? Oh yeah, it does, right?
Yep.
So we have to change how we lead to create the kind of environment that attracts top-tier, intellectually curious candidates so we don't have to work so hard at recruiting.
Yeah.
And it is possible. I've been in cybersecurity 20 years. I've never paid a recruiting fee ever. And I have no trouble attracting top, diverse talent. And there's only one reason. I create roles for people. I don't fit people into roles. And the role is based on what they wish to learn. And they choose that. I make a commitment to allowing them to realize that.
That's great, and something that you mentioned, we actually, Jim, you might have participated in this at ICIT. We published a paper last year on the importance of diversity for national security, because this is a whole different conversation, but all of you are in the national security business if you do cyber, believe it or not. But you mentioned the diversity of thought. I mean, these different perspectives, whether it's racial, gender, sexual orientation, neurodiversity, they bring different ways of looking at the same problem, and it's critical to making the right decisions for the business. So that's an excellent point. We're out of time. I see the flashing light down here. So I want to close by, obviously, this has been a fantastic discussion, a lot of great takeaways. So I'm going to start with you and go down. What is the one primary takeaway that you'd like the audience to walk away from after hearing our discussion today?
So I would say, when you're engaging with your consumers, with your users, with your stakeholders, focus on stopping actual attacks. Let's stop with like dispensing FUD around like, public Wi-Fi and crypto or juice jacking, or like the stuff that you hear on the local news. Like, that's not getting us anywhere. Let's focus on stopping actual attacks, and we do that by clearly communicating what they are. We talk to them like our stakeholders like adults. We walk them through, and we provide actionable advice that they walk away from that conversation and they do a thing that makes them more, materially safer. Do that, and we're gonna rise the tide and lift all the boats.
So for me, it is really position security as a partner, right? I think a lot of times we believe our job is to push security onto the business or restrict them from doing things that are risky. And I don't think that's it, right? I think it's really about listening and understanding that if there is no business to run, we have nothing to protect, right? So really getting in deep, understanding the business, the people who run the business, the type of people who are successful at your company, figuring out how to best position security to be influential and to be enabling, and figuring out how to make security, again, not just the right thing to do, but the smart thing to do.
For all of you that are identity professionals and report up to a CISO, I want you to think about ways of equipping your CISO more effectively in difficult economic times that we're in today, largely budget cuts across the IT organizations that we're dealing with. And the way to do that is actually not to lead the business case with the risk or the risk mitigation or the risk management. It's a bit counterintuitive, but that's a bit of a slippery slope, because all the other stakeholders that are making decisions to allocate scarce resource to the highest risks don't understand risk probability. And if you're in a position as a CISO where you're defining risk probability and saying things like Monte Carlo simulation modeling that tells us what the probability of risk is, you're talking a language that none of your stakeholders do for their investments, and you're alienating your stakeholders by doing that. Equip your CISOs with a very simple business case that says, we will reduce operating costs. We need an investment in order to do that. Here's what we're investing in, and here's the reduction in operating costs that you're going to get. If the scenario does not fit for that, then talk about something called IT cost ownership, or IT ownership, or the cost of IT ownership. And what you factor into the cost of IT ownership, which isn't on the balance sheet anywhere, is the cost of configuration management, vulnerability management, as part of the cost of the IT infrastructure or even the software. And so adding that cost makes it the cost of IT ownership. So then the CISO can say to their stakeholders, I'm reducing the cost of IT ownership. And I'm telling you, for the next several years, that's going to be very popular in stakeholder review meetings and with from a financial standpoint. So equip your CISO with ammunition that says lower operating cost or lower the cost of IT ownership, justifying the investment needed. The byproduct is better risk management. But you're not leading with that, you're just saying that's the end result.
Yeah, going back to that, how do you influence conversation we had earlier. And I think for me, what I really like all of you to walk away from is knowing your role as leaders in the organization. My career has put me in some really interesting conversations with generals. We've advised Congress together, CIOs, presidential advisors, and all of them will always tell you that it's not about them. Their role is to inspire and motivate their teams to move the ball forward. So you don't have to be a CISO, you don't have to be on the keynote stage to really be able to make an impact within your organization. So please remember that as you go home and kind of take all these action items and implement them. So guys, thank you so much. This was fantastic. Thank you all again, and enjoy the rest of your conference.